Let's go on a journey into the future. Imagine it's the year 2035. Our world will be even more globalized and highly connected than it is today. All global powers have committed to tackle climate change. The days of the ego state are over. This is Farida. She's a software developer from Togo. Farida never had the chance to receive proper formal education, what we used to call it back in 2020, but she had access to digital communities, to online networks, and she learned about coding, new technologies, and she became a software developer and founded a very successful startup. This startup grew, became a global player, and Farida is now handled as the new Steve Jobs. Everyone in Farida's company is innovative, curious, and learning is not only part of their job, it is also their passion. Let's get back to 2020. Where are we today? Today, we already live in the so-called VUCA world. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity mark our reality. Everything around us is constantly, rapidly, and radically changing. That means, for example, that our future will be remote first. Digital will be the norm. We will only meet each other when it's really necessary, like we already experienced these past few months in this COVID setting. Innovation spans are getting shorter and shorter, which means more regularly and with a much shorter time span, new technologies are introduced that have a radical impact on our work and on our life. And that is one of them, AI, a new technology that will really have an impact on pretty much every life and definitely on a lot of jobs that we're currently doing as well. And with all this, lastly, the half-time of knowledge is constantly and radically decreasing, which means whatever knowledge and whatever skill you possess today, it is being made obsolete faster and faster. So with all this, with this setting, work to learn is over. It doesn't exist anymore. Our future is learn, work, learn, work, learn, work. Lifelong learning is not a buzzword anymore. It is already here. It is already our reality today. Because in the future, where everyone needs to change professions and definitely jobs several times in their lifetime, the self-motivation to be a lifelong learner is paramount. So we know all this. This is not a distant, faraway future. This is already our reality today. And where are we with our education systems in this? We are still here, stuck in a frontal teaching setting, delivering knowledge, exam pressure, killing motivation and curiosity to become a lifelong learner. This image is probably familiar to many of you, and it's not old. This is what most universities and also schools, our education system, looked like before the COVID crisis. Now, during the last few months of Corona, we have taken this setting online, and then it looked like this. Not much has changed here. We are still stuck in a frontal teaching setting, one person speaking, everyone else is listening. And I think that for many of us, these black tiles were really the horror during the last few months. So this old setting is engraved in our minds and also in our language, because this, what you see here in German, is called Vorlesung, lecture. Vorlesung literally means to read something out to someone, and it stems from a time when reading was a privilege. Another nice German word is Abschluss, graduation. Schluss means end. Finally, an end to all this learning. So many of my students, they're so happy when they're finally done with their university, their higher education, and they get their Abschluss. But there is no more end to learning in a lifelong learning setting. So what do we need? What skills and what setting do we actually need to be successful in this VUCA world? We know that in the future, soft skills will be the new hard skills. While we also still need some sort of hard skills, soft skills are becoming more and more important. And I would really like to call these skills differently. I would like to call them KUFU skills. Ku because they're already current and important today, and Fu because they're so important for the future. Because there will be no future in a lifelong learning setting if you don't possess skills like curiosity, self-motivation, openness, the ability to collaborate, be curious. Currently, we are not only not training these skills, we're even actively detraining them in most of our education settings. And we see that we are already going from degrees more to skills, that we have a huge shift there, but we're still constantly trying to squeeze new skills, new competencies into very limited curricula. And that is pretty absurd. But despite all this, and despite the picture of the black tiles I showed you earlier, this spring, I was so hopeful. In March, my phone was ringing nonstop when the corona crisis had just really hit Germany and we went into lockdown. We were also thrown unbelievably quick into the digital world, into the digital era. And my phone was ringing nonstop, and I had so many universities calling me from all over Europe saying, Rona, you're so digital. Can you help us to take our content, our place, our university into the digital space? And it was pretty amazing this time. Everyone was on the move, on the go, finding new solutions. We developed new content, new curricula, new modules, and everything was so solution oriented. But just a few months later, not so much of that was left. I don't know how many times I heard this summer, we plan in presence this winter. Only one goal, back to the old world, back to the old setting. In April, Peter André Alt, the rector of the German Rectors Conference, the president of the German Rectors Conference, called for the summer semester to be postponed. In June 2020, we had more than 2,000 lecturers in Germany signing a letter warning against the forced digitalization of universities and saying that we have to defend face-to-face teaching. Their letter is still online. You can read it online. It has by now more than 6,000 signatories. So when we look at digital education, we see that we are lacking a lot here in Germany, but also in many other countries. Infrastructure, equipment, content, skill set, and most importantly, the mindset. I had a call with a professor a couple of weeks ago, and she said to me, Rona, I've been here for 15 years and nothing has changed. And I'm sure if you talk to me again in 15 years, nothing has changed still. I am seeing this a lot, and I had this conversation a lot in the last few months, that people still think that this whole digital thing is just an exception. And as soon as COVID is over, we want to go back to where we were before. And to be perfectly honest, in a way, I get it, because it is very hard to change old habits, to implement new ideas and structures. And even though I am very digital, the last few months were also very challenging for me. I had to change a lot. I had to learn a lot. I had to try out a lot of new things. And I didn't necessarily always feel super confident when I did them for the first time. So I think that it's natural in a way, but on the other hand, this is exactly what lifelong learning is, right? And I think that by now we have all understood that there is no more way back, that this old world doesn't exist anymore, and that we have to adapt to the new digital setting. You remember I told you about Farida in the beginning, and that she had the right Khufu skills. And I think it is really critical right now that we understand that we have to fundamentally transform our education system and finally make universities and actually the whole education system, turn it into the places where people are prepared for the complexity of the digital world and for the complexity of constant and radical transformation. Because if we don't manage to do that, 2035 is looking pretty dark for us. If our future is radical reskilling, we really need a radical rethinking of our higher education. I brought you this quote. I think college is basically for fun and to prove that you can do your chores, but they're not for learning. Do you agree with this? Well, I think that we always learn something. So we also learn something at university, but in a future where we don't have to go to space anymore, to physical space to learn something, but we can learn anywhere at any time. And certificates don't matter anymore to employers. The question is really, what should universities be? What should they offer? What should they stand for? Should they offer research? Should they prepare for the working world? How does the one thing interact with the other one? I think that are very important and relevant questions that we have to ask ourselves, but no matter what exactly our answers are to these questions, we know that we need a radical mindset shift and an infrastructure push, and that we need it now. Because I personally imagine universities and higher education as the places that are setting the tone for our future, that are the innovation engines, not the places lagging behind. So let's fast forward again to 2035. What will the world look like? Well, no one needs to go any longer to a place to teach, learn, or research. Digital learners will organize themselves to a large extent digitally in the digital world. And they will be in digital networks and communities. And if we're honest, to a large extent, this is already happening today. We are having Zoom calls with people from all over the world, collaborating across countries. And I worked a lot under the hazelnut tree and in my vegetable pitch this summer. And I think that in the future, we will see even more flexibility here. Year-long degrees at a certain place won't exist anymore. It will become much more flexible. Short courses, nano degrees, with a lot of transdisciplinary exchange, intergenerational exchange, and also working cross-border. Universities in the future, they might still exist, but only if they offer also a digital space where people can meet and exchange and reflect on topics and have critical discussions. And it's important that there not only technology plays a role, but also other subjects like humanities, the arts, history, ethics, and all that, like I already mentioned, cross-culture, cross-country, cross-disciplinary, that has to be the norm. If campuses still exist in the future, it is important that they're not concrete jungles anymore, but that they are also showcasing our societal transformation, that they're characterized by biodiversity, renewable energy, vertical gardening, and of course, again, prime digital infrastructure. Companies, they might offer projects in the future for the learners to collaborate. But I think even more important is that employees keep a lifelong learning relationship with the campus, that they keep returning to update their skills, to act as mentors, and to be mentees. Because our whole view of the learner-teacher relationship will also entirely change, and it will be characterized by collaboration. If we look at these pictures, we see that to a large extent, the future is already here, that there's so many amazing people already working on this future, setting up new universities, new schools, new places for lifelong learning and collaboration. And that really gives me hope that we see that a lot is already happening there. And speaking of hope, let's look at Farida. What is Farida doing in 2035? How is she using the university system? In 2035, Farida regularly exchanges with learners on the digital campus on different projects and new ideas, and she gives important input for new research, and she updates her own skills. The university is a digital and an analog place where future mindsets are being fostered. Now, we cannot foresee the future, but we see that the future is already here to a large extent, and that we have to get ready to shape it. Because if we don't disrupt ourselves, we will be disrupted. And that is why I'm very excited that we are already with many people on the way to redefining learning and finding new ways. I held this talk for the first time a couple of weeks ago at the DigiEdu Hack, which is a project in collaboration with the European Union, the European Commission, and a couple of other partners. And I will link you here the talk at that time, the video to the talk, and also the conversation that we had afterwards with people from the European Commission and some universities. And I think that it was a very challenging year for all of us. I think I mentioned in the talk what I've seen in terms of how people, especially from universities as well, want to go back to the old world. And I think we have all realized by now that this old world doesn't exist anymore. I believe that 2020 was a very challenging year for pretty much everyone, for all of us, one way or the other. So I think we're heading now into a hopefully calm and very well-deserved Christmas break. And then I hope that we come back with the spirit that we have arrived in a new era, in a new digital setting, where we just cannot afford anymore, especially with our education that is so fundamental, to stick to old mindsets, to old hierarchies, to old belief sets that just don't work anymore. And that we get to work to finally implement this change that is so urgently needed. And that we get together with people that are working on this, because there's so many great new ideas, people out there, startups that are working on this. So let's take a break and then let's get together and push this conversation forward, implement new ideas, because we really don't have time anymore to talk about this much more. I hope you guys all have a wonderful Christmas break, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you and seeing you in the next year to push the agenda of redefined learning and all the great ideas that are out there in that space.